For 4,200 years, this substance was the primary wound healer across every inhabited continent on Earth. Then the pharmaceutical industry replaced it. Now they charge you $47 for half an ounce of it, repackaged under a medical brand name. This is raw honey, the wound medicine they made you forget. In 2200 BCE, inside a clay tablet sitting in the University of Pennsylvania Museum right now, that tablet is the oldest known medical document in human history. It was written by a Sumerian physician in the city of Nippur, in what is now modern Iraq, approximately 4,200 years ago. The New York Times reported its translation in 1953. Among the prescriptions carved into the clay in cuneiform script are detailed instructions for preparing wound treatments. 3 ingredients appear repeatedly: wine, myrrh, and honey. This was not folk superstition. This was the standard of care for the most advanced civilization on Earth at that time. The Sumerians had already developed written language, mathematics, and astronomy. Their physicians documented treatments with a precision that would not be matched for another 1,000 years. And when a soldier or a laborer came to them with an open wound, they reached for honey. For centuries later, the Egyptians formalized the practice. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, written around 1600 BCE and considered the oldest known surgical treatise in existence, documents the use of honey as a primary wound dressing. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to approximately 1500 BCE, includes honey in more medical preparations than any other single ingredient. More than 500 of the 843 known Egyptian medical formulas contain honey. That is not an estimate. That is a direct count from the surviving papyri. Hippocrates, the Greek physician known as the father of Western medicine, prescribed honey for wound treatment in the 4th century BCE. He wrote, and this is a direct, documented quotation preserved in the medical literature, that honey cleans sores and ulcers, softens hard ulcers of the lips, and heals carbuncles and running sores. Roman legions carried honey as standard medical supply for battlefield wounds. Dioscorides, the Roman military surgeon, whose pharmacopoeia remained the dominant medical reference in Europe for 15 centuries, prescribed honey explicitly for infected wounds and burns. In the 7th century CE, the Quran made a statement that would later be verified by modern microbiology. Surah Annals. Verse 69 states that from the bee emerges a drink wherein there is healing for mankind. Ayurvedic medical texts in India prescribed honey for wounds independently of the Egyptian or Greek traditions. Traditional Chinese medicine documented its use under the name feng mi for the same purpose. 4,200 years, 6 continents. Every major civilization, the same substance, the same application, the same result. Then, in 1928, a Scottish bacteriologist named Alexander Fleming left a petri dish uncovered in his laboratory at St. Mary's Hospital in London. A mold spore drifted in and killed the Staphylococcus bacteria growing on the plate. Fleming named the active compound penicillin. By 1942, it was in mass production. By 1945, it had saved an estimated 12 to 15% of Allied soldiers who would have otherwise died from wound infections. And within a single generation, the entire global medical system abandoned honey, a substance with 42 centuries of documented clinical use, in favor of synthetic antibiotics. The pharmaceutical industry never looked back. To understand why this mattered, you need to understand what honey does at the molecular level when it contacts damaged tissue, because it is not one mechanism. It is 5 operating simultaneously. First, osmolarity. Honey is a supersaturated sugar solution. It is approximately 80% sugar by weight, with a water content of only 15 to 21%. When you apply honey to a wound, it creates an intensely hypertonic environment. Water moves out of bacterial cells through osmotic pressure. The bacteria dehydrate. Their cell walls collapse. They die. This mechanism is passive and indiscriminate. It affects virtually all bacterial species, including strains resistant to antibiotics. Second, pH honey has a pH of approximately 3.2 to 4.5. That is acidic. Most pathogenic bacteria, including Staphylococcus, aureus, and Pseudomonas aeruginosa, require a neutral or slightly alkaline pH to reproduce. The acidic environment of honey inhibits their growth and creates conditions favorable for fibroblast activity, which accelerates tissue repair. Third, hydrogen peroxide. This is the mechanism most people do not know about. Honey contains an enzyme called glucose oxidase, which bees add to the nectar during production. When honey is diluted, which is exactly what happens when it contacts wound fluid, glucose oxidase activates. It converts glucose into gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. The hydrogen peroxide is released slowly, in concentrations high enough to kill bacteria, but low enough to avoid damaging human tissue. A Frontiers in Microbiology study confirmed that this slow-release mechanism is effective against both planktonic bacteria and biofilms. Fourth, methylglyoxal. This compound is present in high concentrations in Manuka honey specifically, derived from the dihydroxyazone found in the nectar of the Leptospermum scoparium bush in New Zealand and Australia. Methylglyoxal disrupts bacterial quorum sensing, the chemical communication system bacteria use to coordinate biofilm formation. A mature biofilm is the primary reason chronic wounds resist antibiotic treatment. No commercial antibiotic reliably penetrates a mature biofilm. A study published in the journal FEMS Immunology and Medical Microbiology confirmed that Manuka-type honeys eradicate biofilms produced by Staphylococcus aureus and Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Fifth, anti-inflammatory action. Honey reduces edema, exudate, and the inflammatory markers that cause pain and swelling around a wound. A review published in PMC confirmed that honey modulates the inflammatory response, promoting the transition from the inflammatory phase to the proliferative phase of wound healing, the phase where new tissue actually forms. 5 mechanisms, working simultaneously against every category of wound pathogen, for $3 a jar. Now here is where the timeline becomes uncomfortable for the wound care industry. In 2025, a clinical study was published in the Journal of Neonatal Surgery comparing honey to silver. Sulfadiazine, the standard hospital burn cream used in emergency departments worldwide on pediatric burn patients. The results were unambiguous. The honey group healed in 9.3 days. The silver sulfadiazine group took 13.7 days. That is 32% faster healing. The infection rate in the honey group was 8.3%. In the silver sulfadiazine group, it was 23.3%. That is a 64% reduction in infection. The honey group reported lower pain scores and required fewer dressing changes. That study was not an outlier. A systematic review and meta-analysis published in Nutrients in 2024, which aggregated data from multiple randomized controlled trials, found that honey dressings shortened chronic wound healing time by an average of 17.13 days compared to conventional treatments. The confidence interval was significant. The p-value was 0.0003. A separate meta-analysis published in Science Direct examined honey versus silver sulfadiazine specifically across multiple burn studies. The conclusion stated directly that the available evidence suggests that honey dressings promote better wound healing than silver sulfadiazine for burns, and silver sulfadiazine itself is now under scrutiny. A 2005 study published in Biomaterials found that silver sulfadiazine delays the wound healing process and that silver has serious cytotoxic activity on various host cells. A 2019 review in Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, Global Open stated explicitly that for burns, silver sulfadiazine slows healing and should not be used. The compound suppresses macrophage recruitment, inhibits collagen deposition, and disrupts reepithelialization, the exact processes a wound needs to heal. The global wound care market is valued at $22.22 billion as of 2025, according to Markets and Marks. It is projected to reach $30.48 billion by 2030. The global pharmaceutical industry will surpass $1.75 trillion in total revenue this year, according to Evaluate Pharma. Inside the wound care market, the products are expensive. Metahoney, the FDA-cleared medical-grade honey wound gel manufactured by Integra. Life Sciences costs between $25 and $47 for a half-ounce tube at retail pharmacy prices. That is the same honey, sterilized and repackaged. The FDA first cleared it in 2007. The active ingredient is leptospermum honey. The same substance, silver sulfadine cream, brand name Silvadene, costs $15 to $45 per tube, depending on pharmacy and insurance coverage. Hydrogel wound dressings range from $8 to $30 per application. Collagen matrix dressings cost $50 to $200 each. Negative pressure wound therapy devices run between $70 and $150 per day of use. The average cost to treat a single chronic wound through Medicare is $3,415 to $3,859. There are approximately 8.2 million Americans currently living with chronic wounds. The total annual cost to Medicare alone ranges from $28.1 billion to $96.8 billion. A 1-pound jar of raw honey at a grocery store costs $3 to $8. A 12-ounce bottle of raw, unfiltered clover honey at Walmart costs approximately $5. It contains more product than 12 tubes of Metahoney combined. Raw honey has a shelf life that is effectively indefinite. Archaeologists have recovered sealed jars of honey from Egyptian tombs that were over 3,000 years old. The honey was still edible. The application is simple, but must be done correctly for minor cuts, scrapes, and first-degree or superficial second-degree burns. Clean the wound thoroughly with clean water. Pat the area dry with a sterile gauze pad. Apply a thick layer of raw, unfiltered honey directly to the wound surface. The layer should be approximately 3 to 5 millimeters, thick enough that the wound bed is completely covered and no skin is visible through the honey. Cover with a non-adhesive sterile gauze pad or a non-stick dressing. Secure with medical tape. Change the dressing every 12 to 24 hours or when the dressing becomes saturated with wound exudate. The honey works best when it is raw and unfiltered. Pasteurized commercial honey, the kind sold in squeeze bottles at most grocery stores, has been heated to temperatures above 70 degrees Celsius. This destroys glucose oxidase, which eliminates the hydrogen peroxide mechanism. Raw honey retains all active enzymes. For burns specifically, the evidence is strongest for superficial partial thickness burns. Apply honey immediately after cooling the burn under running water for at least 20 minutes. The honey layer reduces pain on contact due to its anti-inflammatory action and its ability to seal nerve endings from air exposure. Manuka honey, specifically varieties rated UMF 10 or above, provides the additional methylglyoxal mechanism and is the type used in the clinical trials cited in this video. However, raw multifloral honey, common clover, wildflower, or acacia, still provides the osmolarity, pH, and hydrogen peroxide mechanisms and has been used successfully in wound studies. Do not use honey on deep puncture wounds, animal bites, or third-degree burns without professional medical evaluation. Do not apply honey to wounds in infants under 1 year of age due to the risk of infant botulism from Clostridium botulinum spores that may be present in raw honey. This risk does not apply to adults or children over 12 months. The adult digestive system neutralizes these spores. Let us put the numbers side by side. 1 jar of raw honey, approximately 1 pound, costs $3 to $8. It contains enough product for approximately 15 to 20 wound dressing applications depending on wound size. That is roughly 20 to 50 cents per application. 1 tube of Metahoney wound gel, half an ounce, costs $25 to $47. It provides approximately 3 to 5 applications, that is, $5 to $15 per application. 1 tube of silver sulfadiazine cream, 50 grams, costs $15 to $45. Based on the 2025 clinical data, it heals, burns 32% slower than honey, and produces infection rates 64% higher. A box of standard adhesive bandages with antibiotic ointment, 20 count, costs $4 to $7. The antibiotic ointment typically contains neomycin, which causes allergic contact dermatitis in up to 6% of patients, and bacetracin, to which Staphylococcus aureus resistance is now documented. Raw honey produces 0 documented cases of bacterial resistance. After 4,200 years of continuous use across 6 continents, no bacterial strain has evolved resistance to the multi-mechanism antimicrobial action of honey, 0. Compare that to antibiotics. Penicillin resistance was documented within 4 years of its mass deployment. Methicillin resistance, MRSA, emerged within 2 years of methicillin's introduction. The CDC confirmed that 1.27 million people died from antibiotic-resistant infections in 2019. MRSA alone killed 130,000 people globally in 2021. The Lancet projects antimicrobial resistance will kill 4 million people per year by 2050. And the compound that no bacterium has ever developed, resistance to, costs $3 at a grocery store. 4,200 years ago, a Sumerian physician pressed a reed stylus into wet clay and recorded a wound treatment that used honey. That tablet survived, the honey survived, the science survived. The only thing that did not survive was our memory of it. In 1928, one accidental discovery in a London laboratory was enough to erase 42 centuries of documented medicine from the standard of care. Not because the new option was better, the clinical data now proves it was not, in many cases, but because the new option was patentable, and a $3 jar of honey is not. The global wound care market is worth $22 billion. The jar that outperforms most of their products sits between the peanut butter and the bread in aisle 7 of your grocery store. The Sumerians knew, the Egyptians knew, Hippocrates knew, the Roman legions knew, the Quran documented it, Ayurvedic medicine prescribed it, and in 2025, a peer-reviewed clinical trial confirmed what all of them had already observed for 42 centuries. Honey heals wounds. Faster, cheaper, without resistance. If this opened the vault for you, send this video to one person who reaches for Neosporin every time they get a cut, because the evidence says they have a better option. It is in their kitchen. It has been there the entire time. The archive will open again soon.